Imagine this. The USS Enterprise is cruising through space when disaster strikes. The warp core shuts down, and not for a few minutes, but permanently. The antimatter containment systems are gone. There is no replacement core, no nearby starbase, and no miracle engineer to save the day. The ship still has thousands of people aboard. Lights remain on for a while. Life support continues to function. Computers are still operational. But one question changes everything. Could the Enterprise keep flying if its warp core were replaced by a nuclear reactor? Now, at first glance, the answer seems obvious. Nuclear reactors power submarines for decades. They've been proposed for missions to Mars and beyond. If they're powerful enough to propel humanity across our own solar system, why couldn't they power one of the most advanced starships ever imagined? The answer reveals one of the most fascinating engineering secrets in all of Star Trek. Because the warp core isn't simply a bigger power plant. It's the beating heart of a machine that bends the fabric of the universe itself. One of the biggest misconceptions about Star Trek is that the Federation completely left nuclear technology behind. It didn't. In fact, Starfleet relies on nuclear fusion throughout its fleet. There's an important distinction here. Nuclear power comes in two forms. Fission splits heavy atoms like uranium, releasing large amounts of energy. Fusion does the opposite, combining light atoms, usually hydrogen isotopes, to produce even greater amounts of power. Fusion is cleaner, produces less long-lived radioactive waste, and is considered the future of energy in the real world. Star Trek assumes humanity solved fusion centuries ago. Fusion reactors already power impulse engines, provide auxiliary electricity, and serve as emergency energy sources aboard many Federation vessels. Even when the warp core is offline, ships can often maintain life support, lighting, computer systems, and limited propulsion using fusion-powered backups. So nuclear power never disappeared. It simply stopped being enough. As Starfleet expanded across thousands of light years, the Federation needed something far beyond conventional nuclear energy. It needed a power source capable of feeding one of the most demanding machines ever conceived, the warp drive. It's tempting to think of the warp core as an oversized nuclear reactor, but that's not what it is. At its center, the warp core brings together matter and antimatter in precisely controlled amounts. Normally, matter and antimatter destroy each other instantly upon contact, converting almost all of their mass directly into energy. That reaction is one of the most energetic processes theoretically possible. The role of dilithium is to regulate this reaction safely, allowing Starfleet engineers to control unimaginable amounts of power rather than releasing it in one catastrophic explosion. That energy doesn't simply run the lights. Instead, it becomes superheated plasma that flows through the ship's electroplasma system, or EPS network. This plasma powers virtually every major system, from shields and weapons to transporters and replicators. Most importantly, it reaches the warp coils inside the nacelles. Those coils generate a warp field that bends space-time around the vessel, allowing the ship to travel effectively faster than light without locally breaking Einstein's speed limit. This changes everything. The warp core does not propel the ship through space. It powers the machinery that changes what space itself is doing. So why not replace antimatter with an incredibly powerful fusion reactor? After all, fusion is already incredibly energetic. The problem is scale. Every form of power generation has an energy density, the amount of energy you can extract from a given amount of fuel. Fission releases tremendous energy. Fusion releases several times more. But matter-antimatter annihilation converts nearly 100% of the fuel's mass directly into energy. Nothing else comes close. Imagine trying to replace a modern jet engine with thousands of automobile engines bolted together. You might eventually reach similar horsepower, but the aircraft would become impossibly heavy, inefficient, and difficult to maintain. The same principle applies here. To match the output of a warp core using fusion alone, the reactor would likely become so enormous that it would dominate the ship's internal volume. It would require massive fuel reserves, gigantic cooling systems, stronger magnetic containment, and an engineering section larger than the vessel itself. And even then, it still might not generate enough continuous power to sustain a stable warp field. The issue isn't that fusion is weak. The issue is that warp drive is unimaginably demanding. Now let's imagine Starfleet somehow builds the largest fusion reactor ever conceived and installs it aboard a Galaxy-class starship. What happens? Surprisingly, most of the ship could continue functioning. Life support would remain online. Artificial gravity could continue operating. Computer systems would still process information. Internal transporters might function, though perhaps less frequently. Medical facilities could stay operational. Replicators might still produce food and spare components. Sensors would continue scanning nearby space. Even defensive systems might remain available, although shields would almost certainly become weaker, and phasers would fire at reduced strength or require longer recharge times. Impulse engines could still propel the vessel. Inside a planetary system, the ship would remain remarkably capable. It could patrol colonies, conduct scientific research, transport civilians, and defend itself against smaller threats. To anyone aboard, daily life might seem almost normal, until someone asked the captain in one simple question: how long until we reach the next star? Without warp drive, the galaxy becomes unimaginably vast. Our nearest stellar neighbor, Proxima Centauri, is over 4 light-years away. Even if a starship could somehow maintain an extraordinary fraction of light speed using impulse power alone, the journey would still take years from the perspective of outside observers, and relativistic effects would introduce their own complexities. Now consider the Federation. Its territory spans thousands of light-years. At warp, Starfleet vessels answer distress calls, explore unknown sectors, and reinforce borders in days or weeks. Without warp, a rescue mission might arrive decades after the emergency. Diplomatic negotiations could take generations. Medical supplies would reach colonies long after patients had died. The Federation wouldn't merely become slower, it would cease functioning as a unified civilization. This is why warp technology is so revolutionary. It doesn't just make travel faster, it makes an interstellar society possible. Ironically, the answer is probably yes. Not every Starfleet mission requires warp travel. A fusion-powered vessel could become an outstanding platform for long-duration scientific research within a single star system. It could defend colonies against pirates. It could mine asteroids. It could construct orbital habitats. It could support planetary evacuation efforts. And it could even serve as a mobile hospital or engineering vessel. During prolonged emergencies, these ships might become indispensable because they wouldn't depend on antimatter production or complex warp core infrastructure. In fact, if the Federation ever experienced a severe antimatter shortage, Starfleet might deliberately construct simpler fusion-powered vessels to keep essential services running while reserving precious antimatter for frontline exploration ships. These wouldn't replace the Enterprise, but they could become the backbone of local civilization. This thought experiment reveals something profound about Star Trek. The Federation didn't abandon nuclear power because it failed. It outgrew it. Fusion remains one of the greatest technological achievements imaginable. By modern standards, it would solve countless energy problems and transform civilization. Yet in Star Trek, fusion is treated almost like electricity from a wall socket. Reliable, commonplace, and no longer extraordinary. The real leap forward wasn't fusion. It was mastering matter and antimatter safely enough to reshape space-time itself. That's what transformed isolated planets into a united federation. That's what allowed exploration on a galactic scale. And that's why the warp core is so much more than a reactor. It's the machine that makes the impossible routine. So, could a Star Trek starship run on nuclear reactors? Absolutely. It could keep its crew alive. It could power its computers. It could operate its medical bays, sensors, transporters, and impulse engines. It could spend years exploring in a single solar system. But the moment you ask that ship to cross the gulf between the stars, nuclear power reaches its limit. Because a warp-capable civilization doesn't simply need more energy. It needs enough energy to bend the universe. And in Star Trek, only matter and antimatter can do that. So the next time you see the brilliant blue glow of a warp core humming through the center of a Starfleet vessel, remember this. You're not looking at the engine that pushes the ship. You're looking at the machine that convinces space itself to move out of the way. And that is all for today. Thanks for watching and catch you in the next one. Take care.